Hi, this is Mike Sonne from ProPlayAi, and you're listening to The Walk Off with Scott Belford and Adam Mack.
All right, so pleased to be joined by one of the founders and chief scientists for ProPlayAi, an organization at the technological front of sports science and biomechanics, Dr. Mike Sonne. Welcome to the Walk Off, man. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, I will tell you that my science knowledge definitely lacking in comparison to my baseball knowledge, so you might have to bear with us a little bit here. How's your 2021 treating you so far?
Well, you know what? It can't be any worse than 2020, so pretty decent start so far.
Where are you at right now?
I'm in Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay, awesome. Right on. Before we get into ProPlayAi, let's decipher a little bit of language here, and let's start with biomechanics. Explain for our listener, and I'm not going to put that all on them, also for myself, what biomechanics are. And when we talk about the capture of biomechanical data, what is that referring to?
Yeah, so biomechanics is one of the aspects of the study of human motion, and it's specific to the positions and the forces that act on the joints of your body. So there's a lot of different ways that we look at biomechanics. A big field is like understanding how people walk when they get hurt, and how their gait changes after they've been injured or as they're rehabilitating.
Kind of compensating type of thing.
Exactly. And then in the baseball world, the biggest focus on biomechanics is understanding kind of, when you see those funny photos of pitchers with their arms all distended and their faces all warped. It's understanding how they get into those different postures and which ones lead to pitchers that can throw harder, which ones lead that to pitchers that might have more health.
So, what is your professional background, Mike? Give us a quick rundown of your resume.
Yeah, so I did my PhD in biomechanics at McMaster University here in Hamilton. Started in 2010 it was. So I've been in Hamilton for 10 years now. But my training
Are you an
is
Ontario boy?
I'm from Windsor, Ontario.
All right, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm doing a tour of the nice blue collar cities of the province of Ontario. So those are my favorite ones anyway. They're the ones where you have the most fun. My actual training is in biomechanics as it pertains to the workplace. Ergonomics and occupational biomechanics. And back in 2014, I had a background in athletic therapy in my undergrad, but I really kind of got out of that when I went into grad school and really started focusing on ergonomics. But my PhD thesis was on understanding how muscles get fatigued. So if you do a bunch of work, how do those efforts cause your different muscles to lose their ability to generate forces? And right around that time, 2014, 2015, when I was finishing my PhD, was when Major League Baseball decided that they were going to put in a pitch clock, or at least talk about it.
Yes.
And it's just like if you were going to the gym and you did a set of exercises and you waited 30 seconds and then you did another set of exercises. If you shorten that break time, you're not going to do as many reps the next set, right?
Right.
So I applied my muscle fatigue model to the idea that a pitch clock is going to cause pitchers to become more fatigued, which we know fatigue in pitchers is probably one of the biggest things that can cause them to get hurt. And
really?
So one of the biggest scientists in the field is Dr. Glenn Fleissig at the American Sport Medicine Institute. And he put out a paper that said pitching while fatigued is the biggest risk factor to have Tommy John surgery. And it's like 6 times higher than any other risk factor.
Incredible. What is the reasoning behind that?
When you get fatigued, people often look at it as, if you're a pitcher and you're becoming fatigued, your ball velocity goes down, which obviously has competitive implications. But if you were to actually look at what's happening before that velocity goes down, pitchers start using, for lack of a scientific, they start pitching with their arm more. Right. So instead of that whole idea of, drive from your legs and use your body to generate that velocity, they start getting more of that velocity from their arm. And that can lead to more stress on the elbow. And as a result, that's when you start seeing those injuries.
So they're almost using different areas that aren't as fatigued to make up for. Ah,
Yeah, exactly. So what ends up happening is that they go, okay, if I lose velocity, I'm going to get taken 500 feet. And
yeah.
that's going to impact my career and that's going to do all these bad things. So what they do is they say, okay, well, I'm going to turn off all those regulators and all those protective things that I have and say, I'm going to keep my velocity up, but they're going to change their mechanics. So going back to that whole pitch clock idea, I put together that paper and that went all over the place. So that was in newspapers and radio, and the MLBPA actually used it and included it as like an appendix in the last CBA. So that's kind
Wow.
of how I got into the baseball world, and kind of slowly since then have been saying, well, we understand that workload is a big part of how pitchers get hurt, but the hardest part to capture there is their mechanics. Because usually it's the eye test that a coach has and says, oh, you need to do this, you're not extending enough, whatever it is. But humans are really bad at discerning joint angles.
Yeah, I
It's
can imagine.
So we started playing around with some markerless motion capture technology, which is basically just using your cell phone to determine joint angles. And that was about a year ago. A year ago in March was our official company coming together, and we've been working at it since to just try and get more and more accurate.
Now, obviously, a lot of science goes into this, but I'm very curious just from the biology standpoint. Are humans even supposed to be able to throw 90 miles to 100 miles an hour, 80 to 100 times in a go?
Well, I think that's sometimes people say, what's the best way to pitch to never get hurt, and
And
it's
you're
to
like,
just not,
don't.
don't do it. And there's definitely things you can do to help minimize your risk of injury, but when you get to the major league level and you are pushing the limits of human performance, sometimes those limits push back because they don't like being pushed.
Yeah.
So, it's inherently a bit of a dangerous and a high force activity. And, it's a matter of finding that sweet spot between, totally getting hurt versus achieving maximum performance. And, that's why I think there's such a huge focus on sports science now in baseball.
Well, pitching really is an interesting thing. I know we just talked to Nate Pearson's um, postseason pitching coach, Anthony Telford. This was a couple weeks back, and he pitched with the Montreal Expos for 5 years. He played professional ball for 15, and he just summed it up. He's like, if you're a pitcher, there's lots of things you can do to avoid injury, but you're going to get injured. He was just like, it is just a foregone conclusion. There is no way around it. You're going to wind up tearing your shoulder or your elbow or something along the way, which is really an interesting thing about pitching because it's one of the few things in sports where it's just like a foregone conclusion that injuries are going to happen.
Well, it's kind of like when you talk to like NFL running backs, they say, when's the last time you were ever healthy? And they say, before I took my first snap. So I think, yeah, one of the things they always say about pitching too is that if you ever want to find out if a pitcher has an injury, give them an MRI, because there's going to be some sort of damage in some way. You do see a lot of pitchers who have long careers and manage to avoid injury, but it does seem like everybody runs into something sometime. I mean, Justin Verlander was the poster boy for, longevity and tolerance of workload, and, throwing 100 miles into his mid to late 30s, and, his elbow went on him this year. So there's a lot you have to do to protect against it, but it is inherently a fairly dangerous activity.
All right, let's get into ProPlayAi. If we can start with, what is it and what are you trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so ProPlayAi is our kind of parent company, and our goal is to provide biomechanics data for people doing a wide range of activities. And our first product is PitchAI, which is a pitching biomechanics lab on your cell phone. And when you typically get a biomechanics assessment,
So it's
and
like an
somebody
app.
it's an app.
It's an app.
It's a cell phone app. Yeah, with a web portal and that too. So
Mhm.
you can get your data and wherever you are. But somebody like Nate in the past, when he's gone to get a biomechanics assessment, it's you go to a lab. You typically wear spandex shorts, and that's it, with your running shoes. And you get these like little reflective markers put all over your body, and it's not very natural. It's very accurate, but it's not very natural.
Right.
And as a result, it's also pretty expensive. And you need quite a bit of technology and quite a bit of background to do it. And what we're trying to accomplish with Pitch AI is to just make biomechanics data that much easier to get, and get it during games, get it during bullpens, get it from the moment you're 12 years old all the way up to the point you get drafted.
Right, because not every ball player has access to labs and scientists like Nate.
Exactly. Yeah, and exactly. And that's, Nate's got that now, but at one point in time, Nate was, you know, a teenager growing into his body, and not necessarily sure because he wasn't 101 mile an hour throwing Nate at that time. So, there's a lot of insights you can glean from that type of an analysis, and making it on your phone makes it a lot easier for the athlete.
I can imagine. Now, I know you're one of a few of the founders for ProPlayAI. Nate Pearson also in that list. It's interesting because if you look at the list of founders, you all came from a wide array of professional backgrounds. What was it that kind of brought you all together? How did this whole thing get off the ground?
Yeah. So myself, like with the scientific background in biomechanics and in sports science and in ergonomics, I've been kind of always trying to find cheap technologies to do complicated things. And before this call, I was on another call where I was telling somebody that at one point in time, I made myself really nauseous because I made a virtual reality setup with a Kinect camera and a Google Cardboard. So I immersed myself in there, and you get pretty pretty dizzy pretty fast. So I've always been trying to make cheap technology do complicated things. And our CEO Reed Hanoun, he came at it from a totally different background, like totally self-made guy. you know, Started his first business when he was 16, and he's been experimenting with technology from a bunch of different areas. And he's also got three sons, all of which are very competitive baseball players, including one that went to Division I in Texas. So Reed and I had been working together on a couple of projects in the ergonomics space. And then when we first started working on Pitch AI, we were saying, we'd like to get somebody to give us the player's perspective, somebody who's young and up and coming and hungry for data and, really focused on making themselves better. And we met Casey Mulholland, who's the lead developer and head of Kinetic Pro Performance in Tampa. And we met him at the winter meetings last year. And we're showing him a little bit about what Pitch AI does. And I told him, who's somebody that you think might be good to work with? And he said first person was Nate that came to mind. So we got introduced through Nate, and Nate's been giving us a ton of great feedback, and he's been working really hard to help us put together a product that's going to help players.
That's amazing. And that is one thing about Nate Pearson that the baseball world is very aware of is he is incredibly analytically driven. I mean, most pitchers in the past anyways, it was go out and pitch, go out and throw. Yeah. But I'm curious about his development or his involvement here. Did ProPlayAI approach him? I know you just kind of mentioned that he was kind of who was recommended. Was he all in when you did approach him about this?
Yeah. So, we kind of approached him at first saying, do you want to be like a spokesperson / endorsement type thing? And the one thing with Nate is that if you give him information, you better be ready to answer questions about it for the next half an hour, because he's just he's so hungry to learn about these things. And after about 15 minutes of going through what we were trying to do in that, it became very apparent that he can have so much of a bigger role than being a spokesperson. So when we were starting the company back then, I don't think we had ProPlayAI as a company, and we were talking about where we wanted to go. And no, it just made total sense to bring Nate on in a much bigger capacity, and he's been fantastic. And shout out to Nate, because I think today he was officially announced as the #1 pitching prospect in baseball. So
yes, he was.
Good for Nate. Yeah.
I'm curious then, after you've attached all the little nanodes or whatever it is to him, and he's finished pitching in his boxers or whatever he's doing there. What did you find about his pitching, and have other players gotten on board with this? Like, is this something that is growing? Are you noticing that?
Yeah, biomechanics is probably one of the fastest growing technologies in baseball, and one of the most sought after skill sets in sports scientists right now. And kind of there's a few things driving that. One of them is the popularity of like driveline baseball. Driveline's based out of Washington, and they've got a habit of turning also rans into elite prospects, and then guys at the end of their careers, giving them a few extra years because they boost their velocity, and a big part of what they do is capturing biomechanics in their lab. And they've probably got one of the biggest databases of high end throwers, including Nate, from their facility. So baseball is a copycat game, and driveline is their models being emulated by pro teams everywhere, and a lot of these teams are hiring biomechanists and building labs. But one of the more interesting things is with markerless technology, where you don't necessarily need a lab, and you've got companies like Kinetrox and Simi who are providing in-game biomechanics. People are having a hard time, figuring out what to do with the data. And then in the last year, with Hawkeye coming into the stadiums, they're actually doing like markerless capture of every player on the field. So teams are going, okay, well, now we have these data. We have no idea what to do with them. So now they want all these biomechanists coming in. And I think that's really what's making it exciting for our field.
So let's break it down for the listener and the layman like myself. Obviously, Tommy John surgery has become, the truth is, an epidemic in baseball. Yep. And it doesn't matter where you go, it's everywhere. It's prevalent in Japan, it's prevalent in Korea, it's prevalent in the majors, in the minor leagues. You're seeing younger and younger players wind up with Tommy John surgery. I mean, let's face it, it is ridiculous to see a 14-year-old get Tommy John. Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned the pitch clock and just rest in general. What are some of the things you're finding from capturing these biomechanic data that you can use, and what should pitchers be trying to do to avoid getting injured?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is being truthful and listening to your body. One of the things that we try and make it really easy to do is to compare yourself against, somebody goes out and pitches when they feel great. And this is a good example of like Nate in this past year. We had a bunch of his data from the start of the season, before spring training. And then we had data as he went off to spring training and started the season. And then when he got hurt and he was rehabbing, we were actually taking video and comparing himself against what he was at the start of the season to make sure that his mechanics were the same as when he started the year. So that's one big thing, and one big application. I think what we're learning the most about injury in pitchers is that you really do need to take into account three things. Your workload is huge. And with a lot of these guys who are 13, 14, and they're getting hurt, what they're doing is, playing on 3 travel ball teams, and they're doing showcases, and they're trying to get that scholarship. Right? They just get overworked, right? So getting overworked, and then, there's a huge competitive advantage to throwing hard, without a doubt. Yes. Velocity, if you look at command and you look at all these different factors, it always
velocity
comes
is
out
king.
that
Absolutely,
velocity is king. Yeah, exactly. 99 down the middle. Yeah, sure, it can get hit, but guess what? 90 down the middle is going to get hit way harder, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we're seeing, and part of the reason why we're seeing so many four inning starters, is that pitchers are pitching a lot closer to their maximum velocity on every pitch now. You're not seeing a guy going out there with 85% effort because he knows he has to throw a complete game. He's going 98, 99% effort. And then as a result, to try and get maximum velocity, they're also at the maximum limit of their mechanics. So, we're finding, and our research has found, is that changes in mechanics are probably the biggest thing when it comes to understanding when you might be becoming injured or becoming fatigued. So monitoring that over time is absolutely huge.
So consistency on your delivery is huge.
Yeah, consistency is very big. Yeah, consistency is very big.
And the third thing, did we already?
So it's the workload. So, how many innings, how many pitches you're throwing. the how close you are to your maximum velocity, and then
And
understanding how
consistency.
your mechanics change over time. Yeah.
Now, one thing the baseball community does is resist change.
Yes.
I mean, there are a million examples of this, from the shift to analytics to bullpen usage. We could go on and on and on. Have you found resistance from the baseball purists from the old school to open their mind to the fact biometrics is worth researching?
Well, the way that we've kind of approached things is that we're not trying to tell anybody to do anything differently. We're just a tool for capturing data, right? So what we've found is that, whether you're old school or new school, you have your thoughts on mechanics, and typically you just haven't been able to capture them. So when somebody can't capture those data, they start making up their own, hypotheses, and we're just trying to provide them with a tool that's going to allow them to, more accurately say what it is. I'm sure there's been resistance. A lot of our marketing has been through social media and doing podcasts and talking to teams, but a lot of it's been teams and that approaching us. So I'm sure there's resistance out there, but it seems like the interest is way higher than the resistance. And I think a lot of those coaches or teams that are resistant to data, I don't know, they probably aren't our clients, and they're probably not competitors of the people who are interested, because that's the way the game's going.
Yeah, I mean, baseball is constantly looking for new advantages. It only makes sense to take this seriously. Who are some of the teams and some of the players you're working with?
So I mean, like, I think we've got close to 100 different colleges signed up in the States
Incredible.
now. Yeah, so really exciting there, because it's great to work with that level. Very serious. A lot of these teams have analytics staff, and working closely with those analytics staff is really something that's exciting to me, because I think what we found in the baseball community is when the pitch FX data got originally released, analysts were able to come up with so many more things because the data were publicly available. And, that's the direction we want to go, is make some of this biomechanics data publicly available. So the colleges are the one. And then two of our really close partners are Driveline Baseball in Washington, and then Prep Baseball Report. And Prep Baseball Report's a scouting service. They do showcases, they do events, but they work with a lot of different age levels, and they help try and find players' homes at colleges and get them drafted and get them that visibility. Working with them has allowed us to get really the data into younger players' hands, and that's really what's exciting. And also with Casey Mulholland at Kinetic Pro, he's really been focusing hard on how do we educate people on biomechanics data, because it is confusing.
Yeah.
It can be complicated, and it works best with a variety of different data sources other than just standing alone. And those are the really exciting things that we've got on the go. But any level, we've captured 10-year-olds, we've captured my parents throwing
Yeah.
snowballs. It's been a lot of fun to work with everyone.
Is youth baseball one of your major focuses? Obviously, if you can get in with the kids and kind of teach them the right way to be doing things, that goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think Nate is the one that kind of came up with this story. Is he was a big tall kid in his teenage years, but he wasn't throwing very hard, and he had a hard time kind of growing into his own mechanics. And that kind of story really has motivated me to try and say, let's get working with the younger age groups. And we do have some coaches that are working with younger age groups, and I think what they're finding is it's really good as a coaching tool. You go, okay, hey, this is what you did last time, and you didn't do very well. Try and do this, and it just gives them that extra point of data, and they play with the skeletons in our app, and they can move them around, and they get really excited about it.
Now, obviously, injuries happen in all facets of the game. Um, Not just pitching, although I know pitch AI is kind of your focus. Are you working on biomechanics to help ball players across the board? Is there an app or something that's being used to help an outfielder or an infielder or whatever it may be?
Yeah, so pitch AI, whether it started with the pitchers, but The Blue Jays and have been working closely with us, and they were using it for a lot of their position players at the alternate site. To give them some feedback on how they're throwing, whether they're doing long toss or working on infield drills. So any type of throwing can be analyzed in it. And we're in the process now of doing like hit AI, which will be, looking at the swing and your kinematic sequence and,
Yeah.
how well people use their lower half to hit the ball too.
That's really interesting. I'm really curious. Did you play baseball at all, Mike?
I played, yeah, I was a pitcher, up until high school, and then, didn't really have the stuff, so switched over to, the rec league
Yeah.
softball. So I'm still playing some of that now, but yeah, no, baseball's. We always joke that we're not the best Canadians in my family because we don't really care about hockey that much, but we're diehard baseball and football fans.
Diehard baseball and football fans, and you can't get enough of those blue collar cities.
Exactly.
um, do you have any other big league names besides Nate that are using Pitch AI currently?
Well, we've got lots of guys. Nate's our public facing guy.
Right, of course.
The rest
Yeah.
of them, just because it's they sign up or whatever it might be. But I can tell you, we've got a database that we compare everyone against, and it's got about 500 Division One and professional arms in it. So the other thing that's really exciting is when right before the world shut down,
Yeah.
I took my camera down to Phoenix, and friend of mine and I just went stadium to stadium, grabbed a ticket, got as close as we could, filmed a bunch, and we were able to get a lot of really good data on guys like Corey Kluber and
Yeah.
Jesse Hahn, and there were quite a few guys that we captured just from the crowd. And that's one of the benefits of this technology is you don't need markers, and you really just need a camera, and you can capture biomechanics.
That sounds like I could be a scientist. That sounds like a ton of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime you can do science with a beer and a hot dog nearby, you're
a hot
in
dog
the
and a
right
ball
line of work.
game. Mark me in. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I know you mentioned something that really kind of piqued my interest here when you were talking about Nate Pearson and how he didn't used to throw with the velocity that he did. I'm very curious then, biomechanics, you must be able to tweak the way guys are throwing so that they can max out those velos.
Absolutely. And I think that's why educating coaches on their biomechanics data and their players' biomechanics data is so important, is because they can identify inefficiencies. And with Nate, with having like a rapid growth spurt, coordination was a bit of an issue. And he worked with some great coaches down in Florida and in Tampa, and went to junior college where they really prioritized his development. And all of his coaches along the way have been really good at identifying his mechanics. So I think we can get to the answer a little bit quicker when we have these data, as opposed to in the past where it was a bit of a guessing game to see what
Kind of
worked.
a trial and error thing, and you can actually pinpoint what's going on, eh?
Exactly. And that's one of the ways we always talk about using our technology is, say you're trying to get somebody to do a drill to work on a certain cue. You want to brace your lead leg better or whatever it might be. This is something where if you do the drill, you can film the person, do the drill, film them again, and say, did that actually work? And if it didn't work, maybe you need to try something different.
If you had to pick one thing that you've learned from biomechanics and how to prevent an injury for pitchers, what would that one piece of advice be?
One piece of advice on what I've learned from this biomechanics, it kind of sounds like it's not a cop out, but like, it's unbelievable how many of these old anecdotes that coaches used to come up with, how many of them end up being true when you get enough data. So I think the exciting part of these technologies is, and this goes for your ball flight stuff, like your Rapsodos and all that, it's a lot of these old adages about different movements or different ways to throw a baseball. They end up being true in the end. And it's really important to listen to those old school guys to help learn.
Well, I know you even touched on it when we very first started this interview, when you said it's funny, a lot of times you should just trust your body.
Yep. Yep. And there's a lot of there's a lot of research in that, especially anytime you're doing something close to your maximum effort, is that your body's going to know how to get itself in the right position to do something. But where the challenge is that if you have, limited range of motions, or you're not healthy enough to get yourself into those positions, that's where the challenges are. And I think what you're seeing with a lot of teams and a lot of organizations is they put a big focus on move well and then perform well.
Right.
And that's why things like sleep are becoming such important things to track, and they're recommending that their minor leaguers are all, big focus on nutrition, big focus
Yeah,
on
there's
sleep.
dietitians on teams now. Absolutely.
Exactly, because when you take care of all those things, a lot of times the biomechanics start taking care of themselves.
That's really interesting. Mike, this was great, man. Thank you so much. Like,
Hopefully it was not too sciencey.
well, no, this is an aspect of the game that is growing, and it is very interesting. And sometimes it's a little intimidating to delve into, but you made this very layman terms for us. So we really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so, so much.
No problem, no problem. It's always fun to talk biomechanics.